So, guys, by now, I think I've said it multiple times on my platform. I am a Christian. I openly declare the Lord Jesus Christ, my Lord and my Savior. I declare the Lord God as King of Kings, conquering Lion of tribe of Judah. Thank you guys for joining the live. No matter what you guys see on this channel, I put God first all the time, and I implore you guys to do the same. A lot of you guys might know this guy on your left, Billy Carson. Billy Carson, you've seen him on numerous podcasts. You hear him talk about like he's trying to debunk Christianity and debunk the Bible to act as though, the Bible is unreal. The Bible said in the last days you'll see many false prophets, and many people come in wolf clothing. They'll pretend as if they mean good for the culture, for Christianity, but in essence, they don't. I think that Billy Carson has traveled the world, and a lot of times people, when they do travel the world, they think that they know everything just because they're a little bit more cultured than everyone else. They feel like as though they travel the world, somebody might tell them to read this manuscript. They believe everything because it looks old and ancient. It must be true. And a lot of times they think that they can just debunk Christianity with all kind of, silly little things that they come up with. And so you've seen this gentleman on the left, like I said, Billy Carson. He's on a lot of podcasts. He's all over the internet. You hear him making some, ludicrous claims after time and speaking about them as though that they're facts. And some of the time, you definitely can't listen to these people. The Bible says, if their angel came down and they say they're of God, you should question them, based on what you've learned in the Bible. And a lot of time when this gentleman, Billy Carson, goes on a lot of platforms, he just talks and talks and talks a lot of words, and he doesn't really say anything. And it's up until now that he's had this debate with Wes Huff that, he's been questioned. You know what I mean? Not his only his integrity being questioned, his knowledge of a lot of book-based stuff that he's talking about as though he knows a lot of stuff for a fact. Wes Huff actually what's up, Axel? Welcome to the live. Thanks for joining, man. Wes Huff challenged him on many things, and he didn't even, challenge Wes Huff back. He just didn't have any rebuttal whatsoever. So, guys, watch this debate. Hope you guys enjoy it. If you guys haven't seen it, look up this debate. It's a wonderful debate for people to get debunked, for a lot of people that are liars that come out and talk about, how Christianity is not real, how Jesus Christ is not real, and then they come up with all these, these stupid little things that they find to try to debunk Christianity. And somebody like Wes Huff, the guy on the right, is gonna go ahead and challenge Billy Carson. Great debate, guys. Check it out.
Yeah, Bill do an awesome job editing this intro to make it way more fancy than this. But I'm here with my good man, Billy Carson.
That's the gentleman on the left.
I've known Billy personally for some years now.
Yeah.
False prophet.
Solid friend, great character, businessman. He's been on Elevating Beyond last time, sharing your whole story behind the story. And what you hugely specialize in as well, you just came back from Egypt, is like the emerald tablets. You've been studying those since what, you were like 6 or something?
No, not the emerald tablets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the emerald tablets I've been studying for the last probably 10 years.
Okay.
And guys, keep in mind, people that you hear that love to talk about how well studied they are, well traveled they are, a lot of times it doesn't mean anything. They can be well traveled, well studied, and don't know anything. So keep that kind of stuff in mind. Keep what he just said in mind throughout the rest of the debate.
But since I was 6, I was studying aerospace technology, which then led me into understanding more about advanced technologies, and then finding the link between advanced technology and ancient civilizations, and going on literally a
Thank you guys for joining the
25-year,
live. Appreciate you guys.
Goodness, trek around the world. Been around the world now over 18 times. Last year, spent 9 months in hotels.
I remember.
As you know, you're my witness. Leaving this big old mansion behind and not going home at all. And
Travel grind.
And you hear our worldly sound. He lived this big old mansion, as to say that he's, is rich and well traveled. Anytime you hear people boast on worldly things like that, always be aware of them.
Traveling nonstop to these ancient sites to
No
get the
humility.
information, hands-on.
Okay. And oh, that was weird. I just heard a little chime. Wes, you there?
Frozen.
Oh. Be too easy if it works perfect, right?
Yeah, I know. What is he calling in on? What is that at?
This is through
Green Day?
after that's Carl. It's through.
I'm gonna speed it up because
It
I want to
actually
see Wes come back on the screen. 'Cause, yeah.
Saying real quick, Billy, too, is I also a shared belief I think too with you with God is I also believe I know God is within me too. It's just, and I don't believe that it's like you have to do 20 circles in the sand and like do a ritual to that was through like my connection with Jesus where I know throughout my life that's been my when things are tough, it's like the strength of God is literally within me.
Right.
As so like where we do agree on where like a lot of the heresies and stuff through over religious practices would be like, no, you have to come through the head of this church to be blah blah blah, you know.
Right.
And personally, and we're about to get Wes on, so we can have two really smart people in this talking about it, but I'm just breaking it down to my level of my understanding. That's been what really drew me in is kind of when Jesus came and flipped all that on its head and was like, no, we're not, what was it, like the Pharisees, like what were the hype? He's like, we're not having to go through all the rules. He's like, they're actually worse than this thief right here. And really looked at what was in people's hearts, you know?
Right.
And I think that's a beautiful thing. I know it has been for my life.
Yeah.
But so Wes, now that we got you on, Wesley Huff, historian, linguist, biblical scholar, PhD, and athlete wannabe. Like how you threw that in the bio right there. And Wesley, my man, I think it would be great to. I know you guys were both recently in Egypt. There's tons that I'm interested in that. How all these things show up in Egypt is baffling to me. But just going right to it, I had here, Billy, you talk about how Jesus was never crucified, which is interesting because my wife, who's a Muslim, they believe that as well. Their beliefs, from what I understand from her, are they don't think that Jesus, as they believe is a prophet, God would have him killed. But I don't think they have any historical evidence, as far as I know, as to what or how or why they believe that. I'm curious for you guys both, and if you want to, I guess, go first, Billy, as to how you came about, like the findings where it seems that Jesus was not crucified, or that's not accurate.
Sure. And in my videos, and if you listen to the podcast, the statement is according to the Sinai Bible. Okay, according to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible. And that Bible predates the King James version of the Bible, and the text there actually is about 12 to 14,000 differences between the Sinai Bible and the King James version of the Bible, which came much later. And then also, one of the things that were interesting is that they discovered the book of Jesus' wife, which is at the Harvard Seminary, which, according to some scholars, that's a little controversial, but they claim that this is an accurate record that Jesus may have even been married, which
The book of Jesus' wife.
adds more.
There's no
That's
book
true.
of Jesus' wife.
It adds more to the hypothesis that maybe he wasn't crucified. I just personally believe that Jesus was an amazing human being. I don't think that he was the son of
Check out the
God.
guy on the right. He really wants to laugh because he
God.
knows this guy doesn't know what
But
he's
that we're
talking
all
about.
gods, as he said, ye are gods, and that we're to do greater things than him. And I just personally believe that the return of the Christ is the return of the Christ consciousness. When we can
He's
all
not even
achieve
looking in the
certain level
camera.
of knowledge, wisdom, passion, understanding, empathy, love that he came to this planet with, and we get that in our mind and our conscience, and we can act on that, those incredible emotions. And that
Wes is just
understanding
laughing at him
that
like
the
he
whole
doesn't know
world's
what
gonna
he's
transform
talking about.
instantaneously. And I think at the second coming is the coming of the Christ consciousness to the planet, not a human being flying back to Earth to save people. That's just my personal understanding of how I perceived it over many, many years of going through this information and going through all this text.
And Wes, I'm gonna let you respond to that. And again, I mean, this is everyone listening to the show. You know, I'm always like, challenge everything.
Yes.
Learn to critically think and
Yes.
continue to come to your conclusions. Even with Jesus, I'm not personally even waiting on that he has to come back to say, I already know I'm, like I said, that strength of God and consciousness is already, I can tap into that right now. So you don't have to wait for him to come back. For those that believe he does, to actually have that like next level of what that's supposed to mean. But Wes, go ahead for what Billy was talking about. I think with a book in the Harvard Museum, and I heard something about Jesus's wife. That's yeah.
Yeah, well, first let me
All
say, I
foolishness.
think it's really cool to not just be in the room proverbially with you, Billy, but be able to interact with you. Because I wish I could be there in person. Unfortunately, Toronto, Canada is a long way away from Florida. It's a little bit of a jaunt. But I really appreciate the fact that you seem to have investigated to a certain degree some of these facts. Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible,
What's up,
what are you
Yves?
referring
Welcome to the
specifically?
drive.
It's the biblical text that was written that made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon. It's a Bible called, I have a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right, from Mount Sinai. I'm assuming that's the mountain that they're referencing there.
Liar.
They put together their own version of the biblical text prior to the King James Version being put out.
Sure. So when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus? Like the codex that comes? Okay. That's why I was trying to get some clarification. Because, so you can actually go and see, Codex Sinaiticus is at the British Library. So you can go and see it. It's on display. And the British Library has actually digitized the entire manuscript. So I work with manuscripts in my linguistic work. I'm an expert on early Christian scribal culture, and particularly in Greek and Coptic manuscripts. I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy that was done by the British Library of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office.
Now this guy's calling him out on his lies. Live on TV.
I asked for clarification is because I want to make sure that what I'm addressing is actually what you mean.
Gotcha.
And not addressing something else. Because the Codex Sinaiticus in particular is just a Greek, it's a 4th century Greek manuscript. It comes from approximately between 325 and 350 AD. And
guys, remember, the guy on the left, okay, was talking as though this book, he read it and he knows it back and forth. And you know, if you read a book and you're talking about it like that on a live, you should have read it back and forth and know everything about it. Now, the guy on the right, he's actually an expert on these writings. So that's why he asked him, are you sure? Because there's no Sinai Bible, you know? So Wes up on the right knew that. And he knew he was just talking out of his face. And he had the book behind him. That's why he had that little smirk on his face the whole time. So now he's calling him out on a big lie. And you know the guy on the left, Billy Carson, he's not looking in the camera. You can tell he's not sure about himself. His posture is very down. He's looking down on the screen, on the computer. He's not looking at Billy. And look at how confident Wes Huff is on the right. He knows he's about to string this guy up.
its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from. So my curiosity is just simply in kind of exploring, when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there, I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27, where it has Jesus being crucified, and that's in Codex Sinaiticus, or the John 19, or any of the other ones. So I think my confusion is that it doesn't read any differently. So actually, are you able to pull up a website with the viewers or listeners or whatever be able to see that?
Right, and to make sure I have the right version that I'm looking at.
While he's pulling that up too, like I keep saying to all the people that aren't scientists traveling the world in linguistics, I don't even know how to pronounce it the right way, like me.
Yeah, linguist.
What
Yeah.
cyanide? I keep thinking of cyanide, like the poison. Cyanide Bible. So
Right.
is that like a version? So from my own knowledge that I know, like when I really studied all this, what I thought was interesting about the Bible was how many different eyewitness. I studied C.S. Lewis back in the day. How many different eyewitnesses and stuff there were, and they went on purpose to mention so many other names that they were able to cross-reference throughout history and throughout those times, from my understanding. And those were different things that I always thought were kind of interesting that I felt was a good concept of proof. And then I want Billy to answer, and also I'm just curious, like the Sinai Bible, where was that piece?
Now, the moderator, which is the guy in the middle, is playing devil's advocate because he's saying, I'm not quite sure about anything, man. I normally question everything, which is he has the right attitude. You're supposed, even if the angels come down and say they are of God, you're supposed to question them, ask them questions, if they're really of God, right? So the guy in the middle, he's doing the right thing. He's already saying, listen, I'm still trying to understand this. I'm a Christian. I'm still working, finding my way. And the guy on the left, Billy Carson, who's supposed to be some expert on hieroglyphics and scribes and stuff that he's found back in the day. He's traveled the world, giving out all these accolades, how well read he is and how well researched he is. But yet still the guy on the right are the ones with all the facts. All right? Because this guy on the left is trying to debunk Christianity, debunk the crucifixion, and then the guy on the right is saying, listen, I've studied this my life. That's because the guy that said, oh, the Sinai Bible. What Sinai Bible? And then Wes Huff on the right says, are you talking about such and such a book? Oh, yeah, I'm talking about that book. Then why didn't you call it by its name? So you can just see that Billy Carson on the left, the black guy, he's just winging stuff. And he's been on so many podcasts talking about things as though he's a real expert. And he keeps saying stuff, leading people astray, away from God. And it's people like this that really lead themselves straight into hell. Me, myself, I'm a Christian. I'm not perfect. There's a lot of stuff that I don't know. I'm sorry, guys. I still struggle with sin like many, many people. I am not perfect. Every day I wake up, I ask God to forgive me because I've sinned over and over. But by the grace of God, every day he wakes me up. He gives me a new day. He gives me a new opportunity to bring it in again. I really don't want to take advantage of him for that. But, I'm still grateful. But honestly, people like this who really go out and try, to slander Christianity, to try to debunk some quote unquote debunk Christianity, you got to be aware of them. When anybody tells you anything, oh, Christ wasn't real, he didn't get crucified, question them. Question how they came across the information. Question the information. And that's what's being done to Billy Carson today. He's a phony.
The text where I was referencing, actually, I was misquoted. I misquoted there.
Now you say he's misquoting it. All of a sudden you're misquoting it.
Okay, yeah, well, so that's good. So let's deal with that too, because I've actually worked with, there are two manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas is a really interesting document because it is a known forgery. And so that's why I think it's important to get to these sources. So at the very start of the Gospel of Barnabas, which we only have two copies of, one is in Italian and one is in Spanish, we see right off the bat that the Gospel of Barnabas, not to be confused with either the Epistle of Barnabas or the Acts of Barnabas, which are two apocryphal documents from the 2nd century, but the Gospel of Barnabas in particular We know it's a forgery because it does things like in chapter 92, it says that Jesus spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, and then he came to the Jordan River and he walked to Jerusalem. But Mount Sinai is more than a week's journey away from Jerusalem, and neither Mount Sinai nor Jerusalem are close to the Jordan River. So never mind there not being a route from the Jordan River to like around Mount Sinai or going to Jerusalem. But there are internal problems with the Gospel of Barnabas, which indicate that it shows no actual indication of evidence of coming from or even having knowledge of first century Jewish understanding. It actually says Jesus is the Christ, but not the Messiah, which indicates that whoever the author is, he didn't know that those were the same words. And I think a bigger problem is that the Gospel of Barnabas actually paraphrases Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314. So there's a lot of internal evidences that disqualify the Gospel of Barnabas, never mind the fact that we don't have any evidence of it prior to the 14th century, and none in any other language other than Middle Age Italian Italian and Spanish. But the internal content of the Gospel of Barnabas disqualifies it from being ancient. And then the fact that it's doing things like paraphrasing Dante, or it also refers to a rule of the time of Jubilee, which was changed in the Middle Ages from what it was in the biblical year of Jubilee. And it goes with the Middle Ages concept, not the ancient concept. So I think what I'm getting at is, so I'm a historian and I deal with sources. So when I'm looking at sources, I want to make sure that I have a methodology by which I approach any type of source. So if there is something that denies the crucifixion, I want to make sure that I'm analyzing it and that the methodology by which I analyze it actually reveals that the content can be accurately tied to the event. So if we're talking about, say, Codex Sinaiticus, that's in the 4th century. Now that is, I would agree with you, Billy, our oldest copy of the Bible in the sense of cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation copy of the Bible.
Right.
The problem is that we have individual copies of all 4 Gospels going back hundreds of years before Codex Sinaiticus. So I have a facsimile behind me of P66. This is a late 2nd century copy of the Gospel of John. I work with this particular manuscript. I can just show the screen right here. This is an almost complete copy of the Gospel of John. And it has the crucifixion.
By any chance?
Yeah, so papyrus is just the what it's made out of. So
I got that from ChatGPT, by the way.
yeah, so I can actually.
I have that with ours.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so I'll show you this. So the documents you actually see on my bookshelf behind me are facsimile papyri that I've made. So when I was in Egypt last summer, I went and I got made for me some papyrus sheets. And so I take these papyrus sheets, which are made from the papyrus plant. And then when I go and I look at actual manuscripts, so I was at the University of Philadelphia last summer, and I went and I saw a document called P1, which is a 3rd century fragment of the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And so what I did is I sat down with that original and I produced a facsimile. So I copied the text. First of all, I cut it out with an X-Acto knife in not the original 3rd century one on my papyrus. I cut out with an X-Acto knife this guy, and then I copied the text transcriptionally on the front and the back. So papyrus is just simply, it's what it's made out of. And so there's categorizing systems, and the standard one is called the Gregory-Allant categorizing system. And so sometimes you'll see when manuscripts are mentioned, they'll have a GA and then a number behind it. If it's made of papyrus, you simply abbreviate the word papyrus to P, and then you have the numbering system. So P66, what I showed you earlier, that's this on the categorizing system. It's the 66th manuscript that was put into the system. It's from the Gospel of John. I also have, 46 and P47 on my shelf, which includes all 4 Gospels and Acts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So the only hesitation I have with what you said, Billy, is that we have single copies of the Gospels, that can be dated to the 2nd century that all do have the crucifixion. And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just like, it's not that there's debate about it, it's that it's a known forgery. I mean, no one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than.
If you say it's no forgery and expert, I'm going to go with that. Let's talk about the Old Testament a little bit, leading up into the New.
Well, hold on.
Yeah. So you guys see how we just brushed that off. Oh yeah. If you say that's a forgery, oh yeah. No, you claim you're an expert at these things. So if somebody says it's a forgery, you and your expertise have to challenge them. Then you go back and forth in the debate of wits and knowledge. Not even so more wits, just of knowledge. If you have knowledge or a fact of something, and you put your whole career on saying, oh, Jesus was not crucified, then you have to stand on that. So when somebody come and challenge you, you can't just say, oh yeah, if you say that, oh, in other words, he does not know what he talks about. And he goes on different shows every day, sitting down like he's like an expert at at this, and he's the foremost expert on manuscripts in the world, and yet still a simple story from Canada is debunking his foolishness.
Do you mind if I address the Gospel of Jesus' wife?
Sure, go ahead.
Another debunk he's about to get.
I'm like trying to write notes like I know what I'm doing. But I'm just curious.
So the Gospel of Jesus' wife doesn't actually mention. So oftentimes what happens is that the text of the Gospel of Jesus' wife is kind of paralleled with the Gospel of Philip, which mentions that that Jesus would kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth. And so those are kind of used in parallel to kind of for this argument that Jesus was married. So the Gospel of Jesus' wife is in the Harvard Library. However, the reason we know it's also not legitimate is because even though the manuscript, the papyrus that it's on, was carbon dated to the 4th century, the text was actually copied from a PDF version of the Gospel of Thomas known as Grandin's Interlinear, and there was a mistake in the Coptic text of Grandin's Interlinear that was copied into the Gospel of Jesus' wife. So we know that this is not a legitimate document, even though the papyrus is ancient, and this happens a lot with forgeries. I have a couple of friends who have actually worked on projects that have revealed forgeries within Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts and within other ancient Christian papyri. But the reason why we know the Gospel of Jesus' wife and that Karen King, who kind of vouched for it and she lost a lot of credibility, unfortunately, for her, and she's admitted that it's a fake as well, was because we can tie it directly to not copying from an ancient text, but actually copying from an online version of the Gospel of Thomas in a PDF form, and the mistake on that PDF form was copied into the text that was borrowed in the phraseology Jesus' wife. So I just point that out is, once again, with our sourcing, I think we need to make sure that we're going towards not just early sources, but actually credible sources. And unfortunately, neither the Gospel of Barnabas nor the Gospel of Jesus' wife are credible sources in terms of actually, and agreed upon by not just the vast majority of scholarship, but I don't know anybody in the field of papyrology, paleography, historiography, who actually refers to these documents as being legitimate.
That's fair enough. I can respect that. So let's go into the Old Testament a little bit. Predominantly, from my research, I discovered that a lot of information from the Enuma Elish and the 7 tablets of creation is a lot of in Genesis, a lot of the creation story that comes into Genesis. Not all of it, but because obviously Genesis is a much smaller version of a much bigger story. But it's literally almost word for word from the Enuma Elish.
All right, again, here he is saying, oh, if you say so, then I'm gonna have to agree. Instead of debunking what Wes is saying, he's agreeing. Wes is saying, bro, you're wrong. Don't you coming on TV everywhere saying all these stuff about the Bible and what's not real. And yet still, when I bring evidence to you and tell you that, hey, experts are saying you're wrong, he says, okay, I can agree with that. Don't agree with him. You're the one bringing up these statements saying that the book of Jesus' wife, and Jesus was married and he was not crucified. Stand by it. You know what I mean? Don't just get somebody come up with a response and you just fold like that. So you can see Wes Huff on the right. He's just like, this guy's a joke.
And the seven steps of creation, the epic of
Now he just wants to move on to
well,
something else.
is also there in the Old Testament. Several other tablets as well, Code of Hammurabi and a few others have made it into that text. Sumerian cylinder scrolls that talk about the creation story. Again, the creation story in the epic of Atrahasis. And so we tend to see this copying of ancient tablets, text, and scriptures, even some papyruses, into the biblical text, meaning that my point here is that I think a lot of people are saying that this information was written in real time. A lot of people believe that. If you ask the average person, they really believe that. But a lot of this information is just copied from older tablets and texts from an earlier date. That's what I found, that it's made it into the canonized Bible, but they never referenced that they got it from any other ancient texts and tablets that have to do with a totally different civilization with totally different religious beliefs.
Yeah, have you read the Enuma?
Yeah, I've done lectures.
Do you mind? Sure. Do you mind summarizing the content of the creation account in the Enuma for us?
Sure. The Enuma is a very ancient text discovered in the Library of Ashurbanipal. And the summary of it is that it really gives us an account, which is crazy, an astronomical account of the creation of our solar system. It talks about planets and moons gaining specific orbits around the sun. It talks about a huge planet named Tiamat, 46 times larger than Earth. Earth didn't exist at the time, according to the author of this text, which is pretty interesting. And then there talks about a nemesis of sorts. In the original version, it's called Nibiru, but in a more recent version, still thousands of years old, the name was changed to Marduk. Marduk is in the Jewish American Library, in the biblical text, in the Torah, and so forth. Very popular figure in ancient times in the religious books and texts. Marduk wanted to be the destroyer, so Marduk is the one that during its next orbit towards Tiamat, crashed into Tiamat, destroyed Tiamat. A huge chunk of it swung away, recoalesced, taking the water, land, and organic material, which basically recoalesced as our planet here, Earth. And the rest of it broke up into pieces. Some of it turned into the asteroid belt. Other parts of it were thrown towards the sun, and some were thrown towards the inner Oort cloud, towards the outer edge of the solar system. This planet, or this moonlet that orbited supposedly a brown dwarf, based on the description of it, gained a very strange orbit around our sun. And we have the scientific evidence now also to match with NASA's data, where we see that Saturn and I believe Neptune switched places. Uranus is flipped on its side, and that's more evidence that something came through our solar system in ancient times and gravitationally really tugged at planets here and switched up their orbits and even pulled the axis of a planet on its own side, where the equator is now running north and south. So a little bit of modern astrophysics kind of backs up what this ancient text is saying. But the Enuma also then begins to talk about the fact that these beings, it kind of cuts into the fact that these beings, are on Earth and at some point begin to engage mankind. In other words, they didn't create people from scratch, but they engaged the existing hominid and began to utilize us as workers for their workforce. In the Atrahasis epic, you see a much similar story, slightly later date period, but still thousands of years old, the epic of Atrahasis, and we see a very similar story, and we see where the sons of God literally came down to Earth. They came from Mars, according to this text, if you read the translation of the planet Mars and to English. And then they went to battle. They were going to go to battle in South Africa against Enki and Lil and Anu. And they come to terms without going to battle. They argued that they needed women, human women, believe it or not. And they also wanted a workforce. They didn't want to continue to do the labor. They were cleaning out the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, digging canals, building cities. and on earth and according to the text on Mars, not according to me. And a decision was made by Enki and Anu and Enlil to allow this experiment to happen, where they would take the existing hominid here, they would slay one of the gods, meaning that they would, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that they're going to kill it, but somehow some type of genetic modification or manipulation, in my personal opinion, it's my personal hypothesis. But in the end, it ends up being that human beings are now doing a lot of this labor and worshiping these people as gods, as they, my personal opinion, masqueraded as gods. A lot of stories there, parallel stories that you see in the Bible, even the Tower of Babel incident, and many other crazy stories that are in the Bible. You can find a lot of those true stories in the ancient text, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you can find the true story of Noah. They found the Noah tablet to give him instructions on how to build the ark. It wasn't a big boat, it was a round disc that he built with the sections cut up on the inside like a pie. That was discovered about 4 or 5 years ago. I believe it's at the British Museum. So there's a lot of text that's just been covered and copied over into the biblical text. And I think that, in my personal opinion, a lot of people are just became a cargo cult, worshiping people that were masquerading as gods. I do believe in God, by the way. Let me make this clear. I believe in God. I believe there's I believe in that there's a creator of the universe. I believe that the mathematics, the quantum physics, all proves that. The fact that we're here, I believe this universe is imbued with a divine energy and a divine spark that lives inside of all of us. I just don't believe that the God of the Bible is truly the creator of the universe. I don't think that God needs money. I don't think that God needs.
Sure. Do you mind if I just jump in here for a second? Because I think we've kind of gone on from the original question. I appreciate that. I do have a few issues with your summary, although I think I have read the Akkadian version. My Akkadian's not great, but I sat down with a Syriologist friend and we walked through it a couple years ago. So I think that there are components of what you said that I would say are in there. I'm not sure it's the best summary. Nonetheless, okay, going with what you said that there were like verbatim parallels with the biblical creation story. Even just going off of what you said, which I think there are components of that I would agree with, the Battle of the Gods, the concept of Enki and the younger gods, and they fight Tiamat, and then Marduk, who swears he'll defeat Tiamat, and Kwenku, who kills Tiamat by shooting her with an arrow, and there's this big battle, and then the gods that die end up being the earth and the sky and even us, because we are the end result of that battle. I'm just curious, when you say that there are not just parallels, but there's actual copying, looking at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where the creation story is summarized in the Bible, what are the actual kind of parallels there that you're looking to? Because as someone who's read both, I not only do I not find parallels, I actually, and this is the majority of ancient Near Eastern scholarship with me, think that Genesis chapter 1 is actually an apologetic against documents like the Enuma Elish. So what are the parallels there?
Separated the waters from the waters, for example. That's in the Enuma Elish, and that's also in the biblical text. Okay,
that I would agree is a parallel. The only reason I highlight that is that if you're making this the argument, because if you brought it up, and I mean this with all due respect, there are superficial parallels. I would agree. The separation of the water, the concept of the earth being formless and void. That's also in the Enuma Elish. However, I think all the other details, it's the details that make the difference. And that if we're looking at not the superficial crossovers, but the actual themes and concepts of what it's saying, you don't have a creation within 7 days. You don't.
I'm going to take the Enuma Elish and put it into a biblical text. There's certain words that they utilize that let me know that they copied it from that text. Like, for example,
so what words?
Separating the water from the waters, so the void, the earth being void. That information is literally just copied over. So it tells you that somebody saw that and said, let me add it to this book right here. Or let me add it to this papyrus. It wasn't a book yet at that time.
So this text discovered that makes it parallel to Genesis? Was this like supposedly discovered prior to? I'm just curious.
It wasn't discovered prior to the Bible, but it dates back long before the Bible was ever written.
Yeah, so let me just say this. So the reason why I say it's actually an apologetic against that is because the purpose of the Enuma Elish, which the Babylonians read every Babylonian New Year, was to point out the fact that the deities, and there's countless deities in the Babylonian pantheon, they actually come from the created order. So they're not outside of time and space. They actually come from the created order. And when they die in this battle, right, when Tiamat is defeated, the defeated gods become the earth and the sky and the plants and even you and me. And in that sense, the theme is that you don't actually have any purpose or end result, and you're not created in the image of God. In fact, in the ancient Babylonian system, only the kings were created in the image of God. And what we see that is counter to that is that even, sure, there's superficial, divided the waters, but we find that in almost every society and culture. That's not a parallel as much as just a generality. I would say what we see within the biblical account is that God purposefully creates. There's only one God. He purposefully creates, and then he creates and it's good. And it continues to say it's good 7 times. And then at the end of chapter 1, just for the thick people in the original audience, it says, and then it was very good. And then he creates humanity, not kings, but simply the humans that he creates in God's image. And they have purpose and meaning, and that instills them with this creation order. And that's not what we find in the Enuma Elish. In fact, we find the opposite in the Enuma Elish, is that the created order is not good, it's a mistake, and that you are not created in the image of God. And there's a reminder that regular people are not created in the image of God. So linguistically, Hebrew does have Semitic ties with Akkadian. It doesn't with Sumerian. Sumerian is a language isolate, a glutenizing language. But I would say, just with all due respect, the parallels linguistically are not there. There might be superficial kind of concepts that are there, but they're so superficial that we can find them in everything. In the sense of, I'm in an office studio, you're in your office studio. That doesn't mean that that we're the same people or we're even in the same place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I don't agree with that. I just see if I have all these texts out, there's a lot of different information that you can see. There's a lot of it's been copied word for word into the biblical text.
But what's word for word?
In your version of what you believe in, you keep saying that God's a he.
He is.
Yeah.
And so where do you get that from?
Throughout both the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament, you have the masculine singular pronoun used for God.
And why is God a man? Where's the evidence?
This guy's something else, bro.
Well, God isn't a man. See, within historical Christianity, we don't believe that God has a gender. However, the way that he has decided to reveal himself is through the masculine plural, and then ultimately by becoming a human in the person of Jesus.
For someone who's supposed to be so religious and who's supposed to know, who's supposed to be the foremost authority on papyrus and manuscript, you're asking very rudimentary questions. Like, how do you know God is a man? Like, what kind of question is that? You go to a kindergarten. You said obviously God is transcends both man and woman. He's a being. He created man. So we technically don't know exactly what God is, but we assume if he created man in his own image that he is a man. It's like a little rudimentary. Are your mind supposed to work? This guy Billy Carson is asking these questions, but yet he goes on all these podcasts on news station and speak as though he knows these things for real. It's just terrible.
Christ. So we don't believe that God has a gender. In fact, the fact that God creates humanity in his image and he creates them male and female, those are two aspects of the image of God. And
Exactly.
So that's the completeness. So historical Christianity has never argued that God is gendered. Jesus is gendered in the sense that during the incarnation, he becomes a human man, but he's still fully man and fully God. But God is spirit, and right? As
Spirit.
the scripture says, we worship him in spirit and in truth.
God
But
is-
nobody's arguing that. What's that? Sorry.
That
God,
always blows my
God,
mind.
God
too.
is the same all the time, right? He's always good. It's always God is all the same all the time.
What is he
Right.
talking about?
Yeah, but we do see that though in scripture, God has revealed himself through the masculine plural. And there are aspects of God's character that we see within scripture that do actually communicate. Jesus says that he longs to gather Israel like a mother hen collects her chicks. So we see aspects of, the feminine of God, not meaning that God is feminine, but that the image of God reflects both the masculine and the feminine. And that's why when, the two become one flesh, there's a uniting of that reflects the image of God as well within the covenant of marriage.
Do you actually believe that the majority of Christians really believe that God is not masculine, that God is has both aspects?
Oh my God, he's
I mean,
such
it's
a
irrelevant if the
child.
majority of Christians believe.
Bro, how many would
Yeah.
tell you, that God's not a man? They've never been taught this.
Well,
This
I
guy's
was taught it
something
growing up.
else.
I was taught it in when I was a child, when I went to seminary, when I went to Bible college. I was taught it in graduate school. I would say I would say a few things to that. I would say, in one sense, it's irrelevant what the majority of Christians believe, because what historical biblical Christianity articulates is what they should believe. There are Christians who run around saying all sorts of things that are not in conformity to biblical, historical, Orthodox Christianity.
Right.
And they shouldn't believe that because it's irrelevant. And so if one Christian believes something that is not in line with biblical Christianity, I mean, that's on them. So God is not gendered, but he does express through inspired scripture the masculine the masculine pronoun.
Exactly.
I mean, for an all-knowing, all-loving God to understand that human beings are going to take that and abuse it, to put their boot on.
Oh my
that,
God, this guy's an idiot,
eons.
man.
It's pretty interesting. Also, I'm
He's
trying
so-
to understand.
Yeah, I mean,
He's so kindergarten in his
let me
way
speak
on
to that
things.
because it is
Something
interesting
real
that.
quick, guys, I have to.
Yeah, sure.
If it was only for the Old Testament, I would have a hard time following a lot of stuff. For me, like what you said, putting the boots on women and stuff, it was when Jesus came that when they were literally like, oh, if a woman, you can just accuse a female of having an affair and murder her, and that's like okay. That he was he just reminds me of anyone that basically challenged everything. And people would say that it didn't contradict what's in the Old Testament, but however people were interpreting it, they were believing that they were following the Bible to women can't do this, you stone them if they have an affair or if they're accused of having an affair. And Jesus, as we know, the famous scene when they were about to stone her, he's like, he who hasn't sinned cast the first stone, basically saying no one's perfect. And was the first one that I know of that started like speaking to other tribes and other countries that people weren't supposed to, like they were so racist and prejudiced. And this is where my heart opened up, is like he stood for this love and this God that broke down all these barriers and just flipped what all the scholars and everything was saying on its head. And that's where I found that I believe that he was crucified, because he went so far like against the grain at the time. And I get what you're saying too, like there's stuff where it's like, oh, that's convenient, where human beings can add in that this is there and that's not. But something else that I always was curious, I'm like, if especially the New Testament, if it was like written by man and stuff and pre-planned, I'm like, I think they would have done a better job of not making a lot of the people so like ignorant. The people that were like literally with Jesus questioned him half the time, like, bro, I don't know if you can do this miracle. And Jesus is like, dude, you just saw me yesterday turn water into wine. And I'm like, if they really it was, if I was writing a story, I'm like, I want everyone to believe this, I would make the people not like is questionable. It's like they have so many characteristics where the humanity in it is what like always drew me. And like even one thing in the Old Testament that uh, David and Goliath kills Goliath, a man after God's own heart. I'm like, if you're pre-writing this to be the perfect person after God's own heart, then he becomes king. You're gonna like have the story end perfectly, but then he goes off to see, he's watching this lady bathe nude, has an affair with her, has her husband killed.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but then goes on to keep praying to God and coming back to God like with a humanity. And God's like, this is a man after my own heart. And it's like finding all these human flaws is, to me, showed so much of like the beautiful struggle that, and I'm not going off everything you guys are talking about, which is factual stuff. I'm just talking from my own experience of ways where I drew and continue to draw my own conclusions. And I'm much more about my relationship with God personally, with Jesus and God, it's the same, over worshiping the religion, because so many people can, as we all know, that's wars are created, slaves are taken, there's so many horrible things that have been done in the name of religion. And it's sad, and that's where Jesus comes back into the game to me. I'm talking, you guys, to me, to where he was like the one that was like gathering all these people of all these, like, what are you doing? Like, we're supposed to be here helping each other. This is about loving each other and coming together. Like, you're killing them because they eat meat on Tuesday and they don't eat bacon on Sunday, and you're literally like murdering each other. It's so messed up.
So I'm gonna kind of move forward because this guy's kind of like just explaining, his take on it, which is not to say that it's unimportant, but he's just kind of just rambling on, as opposed to like the debates.
Democratic when they obviously aren't, doesn't mean we then judge democracy. I mean, think of the Democratic Republic of North Korea, right? Nobody thinks that that's an actual representation of democracy. So people are always going to abuse terms and ideas and concepts. The difference is, though, I think historically within Judeo-Christianity, you have this ethic that we were talking about before that I think is fundamentally different than what we find in things like the Enuma Elish, the Atrasis, and other things, in that we are created in the image of God. And actually, one of the earliest criticisms of Christianity are by individuals like Celsus, who is a Greco-Roman philosopher in the 2nd century, where he accused Christianity of being foolish, dishonorable, and stupid, and he called it the religion of slaves, women, and children. Why? Not because God used the masculine pronoun for himself and people were abusing that, because the concept that Christians believed in of everybody, no matter what your gender, your race, your social standing, Paul says in Christ there is no slave nor free, there is no Jew nor Gentile, there is no Scythian or barbarian, there's no male nor female. These things united people. And we can see there's a historian named Rodney Stark. And in his book, The Rise of Christianity, he actually says that you can track empirically the agency of women across the ancient world by the movement of Christianity. So that, in other words, whenever an area became populated by Christians, we see a direct correlation with the privileges and treatments of women that expand in time when the surrounding culture largely didn't view women as being fully human. So I think we're always going to have abuses, but if there's one worldview that exists that gives agency to people and says that everybody has worth by nature of being just human, it's the Christian worldview. And that's where I think it's very different. So we can argue about why we think God should or shouldn't have revealed himself in his pronouns, but I think that's actually irrespective of the historical reality that we see within the impact of Christianity, particularly on the West, but around the world, and how it gives agency to the marginalized.
Wes, can I ask you one? So when because I'm always interested in this, like you were raised Christian. I always think about this, like my wife who's Muslim, and our beliefs at the core are so similar, but there's some differences. And I wonder, like, if I was born in Sierra Leone, West Africa, where she was, I know in the Bible says Christ revealed, but C.S. Lewis is someone that I really respect, because I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a think outside the box, always, and we should be. No one should just be like sheep and follow what any of us are saying. Like, do your research on your own with everything, of course. But what led you, going back to C.S. Lewis real quick, he was a famous scholar who was once an atheist, set out on a journey to basically disprove the Bible. As he went to do that, he himself found out that to be like one of the most historically accurate written books, which really shocked him. He then became a Christian after that. He's done the Narnia movies, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or their books. They weren't movies when he passed away. But he has an amazing... I love people like him because he doesn't just act like... He always was questioning everything. He's like, why is there this going? Why are these little kids dying, God, when they're... But something that he continued to come up with, which reminded me so much of Jesus and the love conquers all things too, is when so many people overly get caught up on religion over the relationship. And he's like, I've actually met some atheists that are closer to God without even knowing it. And I met some Christians that are further away from God without even knowing it. And I believe that too so much. And I'm just really curious, like, as you went on your journey as being like a historian, studying biblical text, and then being raised, of the church, did you take it, I don't want to put what, because did you take it upon like, whatever I continue to discover, I'm going to have to accept, like, say something you did find when you were in Egypt revealed differently than what you were taught? Like, did you kind of tell yourself, I'm going on a quest, like searching for truth without like a set conclusion to prove Christianity, knowing that it could go either way? Am I making sense?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a bit of an unusual household in that my mom grew up in India, and my parents, when I was younger, I was born in Pakistan, and I spent a portion of my childhood in Jordan. I grew up in majority Muslim countries and surrounded by majority Muslim environments. And we had, a copy of the Quran in the room. In fact, we had the Bhagavad Gita and the Book of Mormon, and for a little while, other documents in our house. These were things that my parents, although they never verbally said, Christianity is true, therefore these are not forbidden. These are not verboten. The truth, capital T truth, of the reality of the world we behold can stand up against scrutiny and investigation. And I did do a great deal of that as a kid. My dad is a historian as well. He has a doctorate, and I grew up on him, reading the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. But at the exact same time, the reason why I actually went to university with full intention of going into the police force, but it was interactions with Muslims and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and atheists and accusations against the credibility of the Bible, which actually piqued my interest, because they would say things that I said that I thought, if that's true, of course that undermines what I believe. I believe that Jesus is God incarnate. If I can't trust the Gospels as reliable first century eyewitness testimony, then I might as well throw all of this away, because I'm not going to believe a lie, even if it's a convenient lie. And so it was actually the exploration of eventually going into graduate college, and then now in working on my PhD, the largest secular university in Canada, that got me thinking, okay, how do we investigate these things? What are the methodologies by which we go about to explore the origins and credibility of something like the Bible? And that investigation, with all due respect to Billy and the content that you put out, has actually confirmed what I believe. I'm dealing with the actual manuscripts. I travel to academic institutions, to other countries, and I look at these things and I read them. And it's a privilege to be able to learn languages like Greek and Coptic and Hebrew and Aramaic and dig into these things. And I think ultimately, I really appreciate what you said there, Mark, with your articulation of your personal relationship. And I think that's so important. But I think it's also important to remember that that relationship is based on something that's real and verifiable. And we can look into the evidence. You know, I have friends who are linguists, philologists, and historians. And when we look into these things and we talk with one another and we're discussing, we're constantly trying to falsify our theories, because that's what good history does. We're looking for the falsification. You don't go in, ideally, if you want to be a good historian,
Right.
with trying to prove your original thesis. You go in and say, okay, what are the avenues that actually could disprove this? And then how do we engage with those in an appropriate and articulate manner? So what I believe is true, but I believe it based on the evidence of the actual documentation. You know, I've read a lot of the literature that you're talking about, Billy, the Numa Lish, the Atrasis, the Bhagavad Gita, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I've read some of them in their original languages because I've tried to be a good historian and go back into the primary sources. Or if I can't, engage with people like my friends who are Assyriologists, who are philologists, and try to not just go off of a translation, but the original. And I think I've found largely the opposite of the conclusions that you have made, Billy. And I know that you are very passionate about what you talk about, and I respect that. I just think that the confidence might not actually be backed up by the reality of the evidence. So when we're looking at something like the Sinai Bible, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Barnabas, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Jesus' wife, these are things that actually have provenance that we can verify. And ultimately, I think the answers to the questions of...
So as you guys can tell, Wes Huff is politely telling him, listen, you're passionate about these things, but before you go about talking about things you do not know much about, do better research. That's literally what he's saying to him. And he's doing it in a very humane type of way. He's not being vindictive. He's not being, I mean, yes, he has a little bit of a smirk on his face, but I think that's just how his demeanor is. But Billy Carson needs to stop going around acting like he's more read and astute than a lot more people, and then he really does not know the facts. He'll read a book here, he might see something there, and just runs with it, but never digs deep into the language, the culture at the time. There's a lot of things that goes into being a historian. Sometimes you do have to learn the language of old, papyrus, things that have been written on papyrus. And, even earlier on when Westhoff was talking about the papyra, you can tell Billy Carson, yes, he probably knows about a papyra, but he never truly know how it was created, how it came about. Now, Westhoff, on the other hand, he knew exactly how people came about using papyra and how they're dated, But Billy Carson, he gains, it's like Billy Carson to me is kind of one of those guys where they go to prison, they read, the Quran, they read a little bit of this, they read a couple books in prison, and they come out of prison being an expert on some things that they read about in prison. They didn't go in the field, do any of the research, didn't, create an hypothesis, didn't prove it with peers, and so forth, and then form a conclusion that's accepted by the community. They just go in there, read a book, and whatever the book says, they gravitate towards that, come out and try to teach everybody the things that they've learned. This is how Billy Carson comes about to me, and I'm glad out of the fact that Wes Huff is kind of like slowly kind of putting him in his place without really putting him in his place. He's doing a very good job of kind of saying, you know what, you don't know what you're talking about. Do your research. Don't be so the fact that you're so zealous about the things you talk about, but be more zealous about getting the information.
I have friends who are linguists, philologists, and historians. And when we look into these things and we talk with one another and we're discussing, we're constantly trying to falsify our theories, because that's what good history does. We're looking for the falsification. You don't go in, ideally, if you want to be a good historian,
Right.
with trying to prove your original thesis. You go in and say, okay, what are the avenues that actually could disprove this? And then how do we engage with those in an appropriate and articulate manner? So what I believe is true, but I believe it based on the evidence of the actual documentation. You know, I've read a lot of the literature that you're talking about, Billy, the Numa Lish, the Atrasis, the Bhagavad Gita, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I've read some of them in their original languages because I've tried to be a good historian and go back into the primary sources. Or if I can't, engage with people like my friends who are Assyriologists, who are philologists, and try to not just go off of a translation, but the original. And I think I found largely the opposite of the conclusions that you have made, Billy. And I know that you are very passionate about what you talk about, and I respect that. I just think that the confidence might not actually be backed up by the reality of the evidence. So when we're looking at something like the Sinai Bible, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Barnabas, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Jesus' wife, these are things that actually have provenance that we can verify. And ultimately, I think the answers to the questions of the legitimacy or the illegitimacy of those things point to not just a different conclusion, but actually the opposite conclusion, and that Christianity is true.
Well, now I'm glad you said that. So those three topics are a very small piece of my concept and idea of what really happened in the ancient past. So that's a very small fraction. You know, it's less than 1/10%. You talk about eyewitness accounts convinced you that Christianity is real. There's been eyewitness accounts of every culture that I've visited around this entire planet, and their eyewitness accounts of what they experienced is 100,000% opposite of what's in the Bible. People have
Based on what do you mean? Can you give me an example?
the Dogon tribe, for example, in Mali, Africa.
And again, so, you know, really, even though Wes Huff has said to him, listen, you keep bringing up points and you're not giving me any concrete evidence, you're just saying stuff. Go do your research. Not only do your research, but research properly as a proper scientist. Now his rebuttal is, oh yeah, but you know, you're just saying it's just 1% of the really things that I've really seen. I've been around the world and all these other people, you know, I've seen. Like, what do you mean? We're in modern days. How is it that people in modern days can attest to what's happened thousands of years ago? But I kind of just want to hear it because I know it's going to be some foolishness.
Virtually the opposite of the conclusions that you have made, Billy. And I know that you are very passionate about what you talk about, and I respect that. I just think that the confidence might not actually be backed up by the reality of the evidence. So when we're looking at something like the Sinai Bible, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Barnabas, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Jesus' wife, these are things that actually have provenance that we can verify. And ultimately, I think the answers to the questions of the legitimacy or the illegitimacy of those things point to not just a different conclusion, but actually the opposite conclusion, and that Christianity is true.
Well, now I'm glad you said that. So those three topics are a very small piece of my concept and idea of what really happened in the ancient past. So that's a very small fraction. You know, it's less than 1/10%. You talk about eyewitness accounts convinced you that Christianity is real. There's been eyewitness accounts of every culture that I've visited around this entire planet, and their eyewitness accounts of what they experienced is 100,000% opposite of what's.
So see, he's trying to debunk Christianity because he's saying, oh, it's so opposite of what I believe and I think.
In the Bible, people have
Based on what do you mean? Can you give me an example?
The Dogon tribe, for example, in Mali, Africa. They experienced a culture that they claim came to this planet from Sirius B. They have the evidence that they knew these beings were from Sirius B because they have the instruments that show the orbit of a trinary star system that we couldn't discover until the 1970s with our modern technology, okay? They understood not only the orbital pattern of Sirius A, B, and C. But even that B was a failed star, which you can't see it from Earth with the naked eye. They knew that it was a white dwarf. They even knew that they said that if you took a tablespoon of it, the entire tribe or 1,000 men couldn't lift the tablespoon. They understood mass and gravity as well. They were told the shape, the sizes, and the colors of all the planets in our solar system, which they recorded. And there's only one wisdom keeper, and that person can never be touched by a person. If they get touched by another person, they'd actually be killed. And then they eventually have a mentee that they break down that verbally handed down knowledge to, and that next person then takes over, becomes the wisdom keeper. And they've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. And science, modern science, has found all their information to be 1,000% accurate. Then you have the Hopi tribe of the Americas, indigenous tribes, Hopi tribe, Lakota tribe, also having engagements with these quote unquote star brothers, even having an account of them being taken underground, which you don't see just only in America. I just came back from Turkey. You have the people from Turkey in Mesopotamia also being taken underground into a place called Derinkuyu by these beings, by these people, a structure that's built 12 stories deep underground, that's made out of volcanic tuff, a very soft stone, and if you don't know what you're doing, it'll actually collapse. There's no evidence of any collapse, and it was thousands of years old. It was reused many times, so the mainstream story about what it was used for to hide from Romans is actually false. This place is ancient, and in order to build it, you actually have to have foreknowledge of how to construct this type of an underground civilization that can hold 20 to 30,000 people, places for livestock, places for worship, with no sign of collapse. And you have to have hundreds of ventilation shafts, and I've been down there. Those ventilation shafts cut through solid rock all the way down to the core. And there's even more. It linked.
So, he speaks as a man who's never experienced anything in his life. And then once he experienced it, he's a believer in everything. That's how he speaks, and it's just so, a person like this is very dangerous to learn anything from, because they learn every little thing and they think they're an expert at it. You know what I mean? So let's listen to the way how he talks. It sounds like a kid waking up on Christmas for his gifts.
To other underground cities that are miles and miles away. As you get to the very base of this area, you can cut through and go to another location. But again, these people were taken under. Also, then you have the ancient Egyptians. Similar story. Major catastrophe comes. These people come and take them underground. Then you have the information in the Egyptian book of Going Forth by Day. More accounts by people, our ancestors, that have accounts that do not match up with the biblical text. And so all of a sudden we're saying that all these cultures, the Aboriginal people, I can go into them as well. I've gone
Sure.
about to
Do you mind?
In the outback,
Yeah.
the Aboriginal elders, same thing. They were seated here by Pleiadians. This is their verbal handed down history for thousands of years. And I can go around the world and I can come with all this information from all these eyewitness accounts from people that should be respected, dignified, and shouldn't be
Respected by who?
And that we're now saying that all this information that they put forth, all their verbal handed down history, all their written history, that's got to go to the side because this one text is 1,000% accurate.
Sure, but so my question is, most of that is oral history, correct?
Oh, it's all oral history, even the Bible.
Okay, so when we're engaging with oral history, what methodologies are you using to confirm that the orality is accurate?
Well, first and foremost,
Exactly.
some of these
He has
texts
no
some of these
answer.
cultures have written down information in caves. You've got cave paintings. The Dogon tribe actually
Cave
have
paintings.
not only written down.
Sure. No, I don't disagree with that. The question is one of historic. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. The question is one of methodological analysis. So you have to have a method by which you can find either that something is falsifiable or that there are avenues by which you can show internal and external accuracy of credibility. So this is what we do with documents. This is what we do with the ancient gospels. This is what I do. I've worked on Xenophon and Plutarch. And we look at the internal evidences and the external multivalent corroboration to try to figure out, okay, yes, we have all these stories. Great, I don't deny that. But as a historian, as someone who's trying to figure out what is accurate, how do you know if I use the term verisimilitude, do you know what that term is?
No, but I can tell you this. Tell me how the Dogon tribe saw Sirius B, knew the orbit of Sirius B.
So you can tell, this guy doesn't want to learn anything. He believes that, hey, listen, these tribes told me this is what they believe, and da 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 da, blah 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 blah. Listen, the Bible says, yes, not everyone has been exposed to Christianity. So they are gonna have a theory in their head. That does not mean Christianity is not real and Christ is not the Messiah. All right. So just traveling around. I remember one time he said something of the sort like, when Christ was, disappeared from the Bible for X amount of years to X amount of years, that he was traveling the world and he was learning from people in India and China. He literally said this on TV, and as someone who wouldn't understand certain things, because he said Christ went around the world to learn from other people. Nothing under the sun is not new to the Holy Spirit. Christ doesn't learn from anything. He's been taught by his Father, Jesus, our Lord and Savior in heaven. Okay? The Holy Spirit. All right? So Christ doesn't need to learn anything from any culture. He knows all things and he sees all things because he is his Father's Son and they're one and the same. So when he said Christ was traveling and learning from these cultures, maybe Christ was traveling and teaching these cultures. Okay? That's why a lot of times people will say, oh, but Buddhism sounds similar to Christianity. And Muslims sound similar to Christianity. And then when we go another place across the world, they speak about this and it sounds similar to what happens in the Bible. Yes, it sounds similar because maybe when Christ was gone for that period of time when he wasn't appearing in the Bible, he was traveling, teaching outside of his outside of where he was born. Because sometimes you'll hear people say someone is not celebrated in their own culture. A lot of the times they're celebrated outside of their culture. Because when Christ was teaching, he faced a lot of resistance. And so maybe he went outside and people were more receptive. Because you're going to say, oh, he was born down the street. How can he be, the son of God? I know him. I know his mother. I know his father. How can he be the son of God? His father is Joseph. You're a little bit more on a receptive path when you go to other people. They don't know you like that, but they accept your teaching and they see that you are of the Father in heaven, and then they can understand. But this guy, on the left, he doesn't want to learn anything. Billy Carson is just set in his ways, and no matter how much he's getting debunked all night, he doesn't want to take anything. He just want to act like a child who thinks that they know everything and don't want to learn anything new.
Trying to restore our system accurately and can show you the orbit with a special tool that they made that was given to them by these people. How do they know the shapes, the sizes, the colors, and the orbital pattern of all these planets in our solar system? And
for observation at night.
Used to have something called the Ziggy and their own harvesting and planting and so forth and so on. That's not enough evidence that there's something.
Well, I'm not aware of that particular case. And even, I would grant that, the ancient people are far more technological advanced than we give themselves credit for. Just because they're ancient doesn't mean they're stupid.
Exactly.
I am well aware, as someone who has done both investigation of the past and done archaeological analysis, that is a reality. My question is simply, okay, you have these stories or you have these accounts, you're referring to them as eyewitness testimony. How are you going about verifying that as fact?
Thank you.
Well, if the people had eyewitness testimony about Jesus, they then just wrote down their eyewitness testimony on a piece of paper.
Yeah, but we can verify by archaeology, papyrus, carbon dating.
So that's where internal methodological analysis
is actually written down. So it's the same exact thing. There's really no
not
difference.
The same exact thing.
Well, no. So you do internal investigations to figure out when something was dated. So something like so when I used that term verisimilitude before, that's something we as historians are looking for. It's a term that simply means the appearance or likelihood of truthfulness. So when you do historical analysis, it's an inference to the best explanation. So you have proof and you have data, and you're extrapolating that data on levels of probability. So some things can be confirmed as high probabilistically true, and other things are lower in their probability that they happen. But there are different methodologies, different ways that you explore historically how that happens.
Well,
so for the
that's
Gospels, we look at
with the Dogon tribe. Scientists went there to visit the tribe, and they still have no answers because they used their modern science. They took the best scholars to visit these people, and they're still scratching their heads.
And like he said, we keep thinking that ancient people were stupid. I don't know why we think that ancient people didn't have the technology, and as some disaster came about, that technology was lost. These people are not idiots. That's what Wes Huff is saying. He's not saying what they're saying is not true. He's saying we don't give them enough credit for being smart and technologically advanced. And that why do we think that we are smarter because we are, we're further on. These people could have been way smarter than us. Why is it that we can't figure out how they put together, the pyramids? And those are hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. You know what I mean? It is what it is. But he's saying there is a methodology to prove these things. And if you don't follow that methodology, then it kind of like defeats the purpose of you coming out and saying, hey, this is what these people experience. It's a fact, and Christianity is fiction. But he doesn't want to hear none of that.
Something happened there.
Sure. And I'm not even denying that necessarily, but the question is, okay, we need different levels of evidence and exploration, not just scientifically, but historically, to derive something as eyewitness testimony. Now we have mountains of that, and I'm more than willing to go into some of that with the Gospels as early eyewitness testimony that can be verified externally and internally. But nonetheless, the only reason I ask, Billy, is because I've listened to a fair amount of your content, and I'm unaware of the methods that you use to try to discern between what is an accurate source historiographically and an inaccurate source historiographically.
Well,
Does that make sense?
I use getting in an airplane and traveling to these places.
That's
doing my
not
research,
enough.
Talking with indigenous cultures and researching as much of the text that is available that I can possibly find.
Okay, so I don't dispute that, and I do believe you have done that. But I mean, even from what we've talked about, so you've researched the text, but when we talked about the crucifixion, everything you cited was either, and I mean with all due respect, false in terms of the Sinai Bible, because Codex Sinaiticus is just a 4th century Greek manuscript of the Gospels that we have today.
Call them
or
out.
They were verified forgeries in terms of the Gospel of Jesus' wife.
Call them out.
You may be right on that particular part of the topic, but like I said, that's less than 0.1% of the information that I hold.
Sure, but that was the original question. So yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, okay, well, so I'm going off of what we've already talked about. So you said you explore the text. I don't deny that. But the evidence, by going off of what you have put forward in terms of the actual documentary evidence, is not just less than convincing in my respect. And I mean this with respect, because I think you have done a lot of research. You've traveled to these places. I have too. Like, this is what I do as my career. But I'm not really getting indication, because in history we go to the...
Because now you have two people. One who just traveled to say he's been there, and I've read the books and I've seen the person. And then you have one that says, yes, I've also traveled and I've also heard the stories, but I've also done the legwork to learn the language, to dig deeper than just what I've seen on the surface and what I hear from these recollections of these people with information that's been passed down for 100 a year, that a lot of things that can be lost in translation and lost over the years through the generation. Because as you think about it, when someone passes on a message, oh, tell Junior to come to dinner at 6. Okay? Tell Jen to tell Junior. You tell Jen. You tell Jen that information, she passes it on to somebody else. When Junior gets the information, he hears, Mom said to come next week Saturday at 2 o'clock in the morning for dinner. What's Mom talking about? The translation is so lost. The information is so lost over time. And no matter how much a lot of these oral historians are. They want to maintain a lot of the accuracy. A lot of it gets embellished. A lot of it gets watered down. A lot of it is forgotten. A lot of new information is added to old information, making it less accurate. You know what I mean? So, like I said, with Billy Carson, he doesn't like. He's just so immature in his approach as to how he accepts information. I think when he goes to these places, he's so enthralled and engulfed in and infatuated with the information and just being there, he doesn't question it. Because then you go to a tribe, they tell you something, you start questioning, maybe it seems like disrespect, and he doesn't want to do it. So I wouldn't trust, his information. Not that it's untrue or it's not true. I mean, same word, but you still want to question everything.
Primary sources in their primary languages. And when Mark asked, okay, why do you deny the crucifixion? The sources you used were not primary.
Exactly.
And they
over and over again. There's so much more we can talk about here. We're wasting a lot of time. There's so
right.
much more. That's this amount.
Do you guys
There's so much stuff to talk about?
Do you think that all these different cultures and stuff describing these other beings, could those have been, I'm not an expert theologian or whatever, but like where it talks about war, I always want to personally ask you this too, where in the Bible it talks about like wars between the demons and the angels. There's a lot of crazy stuff in the Bible too that you can prove it's been written, but it also takes some faith because you can't physically see where there was wars between demons and angels and stuff fighting in the heavens. So there's tons going on, obviously. Could any of those have been, like from what you've discovered or how people have written it, do you think those could have been demons or angels?
I don't believe in
discredits.
demons or angels at all.
You don't believe in them at all?
No, I don't believe in demons and angels. When you read Azazel coming down,
honestly, you can tell this guy is an atheist and he's of the devil. You know what I mean? I don't want to really say he's of the devil, but you openly say you don't believe in demons and you don't believe in devils, and that just means he wants to debunk everything. I don't believe in none of that. He's set out to debunk everything. He doesn't care what he sees. He just wants to be out to debunk it. I don't believe in demons. You see how quickly he says that? He doesn't have an open mind to say, okay, let me hear what these cultures have to say and let me see how it really coincides with Christianity. He's just out to debunk everything. And so this is why a lot of his content, you see, this Billy Carson guy is so anti-Christian, anti-Christ, and anti the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, the first thing he does is teach people how to make knives and swords so they can cut a man's head off. You read, you see these.
Where is that in the book of Enoch?
In the book of Enoch, Azazel. He comes down and he teaches.
Where is that in the book of Enoch?
Winging it again?
The only reason I ask is because there are two.
Call him out. Call him out. He just says things, and then people who don't know any better repeat the things he says. Call him out. That's what he's being done now to him. He's being called out because he just talks crap out of his mouth every time he's being asked. Okay, so where did you get it? Okay, if you say so. No, it's not if I say so. I'm asking you. Where did you get information?
In Enoch, and only First Enoch is an actual historical amalgamation.
Okay.
And then
then he just moves on.
The fact that these angels are.
He doesn't say anything. He just moves on.
They're getting drunk. These are just people.
Whoa. Where are angels getting drunk?
Angels party. They go. They hang out with people. They go to war with people. They put on their outfits and they go to war with people.
He knows nothing what he talks about.
They get married, okay, whatever that means. But they're having.
They don't get married.
Okay.
In fact, Scripture says.
And you can tell for somebody to speak like that, who wants to debunk the Bible, he never read the Bible. He's just an atheist. He just wants to be mean, and because the way how he speaks. Now I know what he's talking about. In the book of Enoch, where he says the angels came down, they mated with the humans. They taught them how to make jewelry and make weapons. They taught humans, and these were the angels that were casted out of heaven. You know what I mean? So, instead of him speaking on it and talking about how he got to that conclusion, he's just banging his head. Oh, they just want to have sex with humans and they drink and they get drunk. He does not know what he's talking about. He's never studied the scriptures. He really hasn't. Listen, I am not a pious person and I don't know the Bible back and forth, but I know enough to where I can say, okay, I've read the Bible. Yes, certain things, a lot of stuff I don't remember, but a lot of stuff I do remember. And I generally want to get back into reading the Bible and learning. As I get older, I have a more mature understanding of the Bible because of my age, because of life, because I've learned just a lot more about the Bible throughout my latter years. But to just come on TV and say, "Oh, angels do this and angels do that, and they get drunk and then they get married and then they cut off heads," you sound so immature, and that's why he's trying to sue Wes Huff now for this interview. It's just he's of the devil, man.
Angels
Like
kind
Merry Christmas.
Not Matt, Mary, Merry. But the point that I'm making here is when you start to really analyze what these angels are doing, and you start to analyze how many people are dying in the biblical text, you start to say, well, how many people did Satan actually kill? And when you start doing the tally on the numbers, God's doing most of the killing in the Bible. It's not the devil that's doing all the killing. And then God says in Isaiah, I created the good and I created the evil. Do what I say at the Lord. So he's saying that he's doing the good and the evil. That's what he's saying.
Yeah. I mean,
And God also said he gives free will. The angels that were cast down, if they did any killing, they did that on their own. And this is the thing. A lot of people want to blame the devil for a lot of stuff humans don't do. A lot of stuff that the killings that happen on earth is just true human beings, just because they are who they are. You know what I mean? So this guy, he's so off, man.
Whole thing. I just let me get this out because we keep going over the same rhetoric over and over.
Because you don't have any good
My personal
information
opinion is that
to
the
come
biblical text
with.
Is a good book. Like I've said, I've got videos. My number one video on Twitter has me saying this. It's good text because if you actually apply some of the information that's in the Bible, you can get a good result, like you have done, Mark.
Right. I struggle with I know I want you to finish your thought. Go ahead.
Yeah. So because you can get a good result, but there's a lot of misinformation in the Bible. There's a lot of false information that's copied from ancient text. And if you go by that text, all of a sudden you end up with 400 years of slavery. You end up with abuse. You end up with divide and conquer tactics that separate people. You end up with people thinking that they're the chosen ones and they're the chosen people. And we've been promised this promised land so we can eradicate another race of people because this is our land, because God promised it to us. You have people that want to go on the papal inquisitions and torture and kill and murder over 80 million people. You have the American Holocaust, 111 million indigenous natives slayed. You have all this going on because of this text, which is set up so contradictory throughout its path across time. You get into the New Testament, slavery is still being condoned in the New Testament.
Was it?
Honor thy slaves, master, as you would honor God or Jesus, it says, I believe. So in Ephesians.
Well, it doesn't say that, but
out of the Old Testament too. I'll let you go real quick, but I'm just, and I know you have to listen to, but I'm speaking as I challenge my own. So it was always, I'm telling you guys, this is where Jesus came in and changed everything for me. But like the Old Testament too, it is hard for me to read. Even Noah, thinking God's like mad at everyone. Let's flood the whole world and murder all these people that I created.
that's pretty bad stuff.
But
Listen to
it
this guy.
seems so contradictory to, and I'm speaking, Wes, as a Christian, and I don't have the, whatever they're called, papyrus. There isn't. This is where people, but I continue to follow in my heart, but it's, so, Jesus did not seem like that at all. But they say God's the same as then as he was now. Like time, he created time. So he didn't come down, as Jesus and change and evolve and then come back with new information and be like, you know what, I don't think I'm going to flood and do. So these are more, I guess, like bigger moral questions that there's not necessarily, but that's where things like the Old Testament challenge me at times. And I know there's a lot of things where they correlate, and I've seen some cool things that come together too, but it's just like, man, to think like I'm going to flood and murder all these people that I created and then leave a few alive doesn't seem like what Jesus did at all. No, I'm
There's a
sorry.
couple more points I want to make because he got a lot of talking here. It did say, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear as sincerity of heart as you would obey Christ. That's slaves. Obey your earthly masters with respect and fear with sincerity in your heart, just as you would obey Christ. So it does say that in Ephesians 6:5, but there's so many
That
aspects.
stuff is what.
And what is the context of what Ephesians is saying? So I think this is very important because we don't take text in isolation. So within Scripture, and this is why all the abolition movements throughout history have only been Judeo-Christian movements. There's never been an abolition movement that wasn't Christian. And actually, there's the recent work by historian Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man actor, different Tom Holland, but his recent Dominion highlights this fact very well. This is not a Christian, but in it, he shows that going right back into the antiquity with the Cappadocian Fathers was the first abolition movement, and then into the British and the American abolition movements. These were fundamentally Christian movements run by Christians because of the idea that when Paul, who wrote that letter to Ephesians, says, in Christ there is no slave nor free, he's breaking down those barriers. So in Ephesians, when he says, slaves obey your masters, he's operating on the socioeconomic context of what he's going on. And he's saying, hey, we have slaves and we have free people, okay? If you're a believing slave, if you're a slave who believes in Jesus as the Messiah, don't be equitable in how you are living your life. Reflect Christ accurately. And that's a movement that he is fundamentally working towards that eventually starts to completely take out the legs.
So pretty much what Wes is saying is that if you abide, for instance, if you're a citizen in a country, right, and you go to that, you decide to be a part of that country, you can't just go there and say, oh, I'm not going to follow the rules. You know what I mean? And God is not going to say, no, break all the rules, go in that country and break all the... No. If you decide to live there, you have to abide by those rules. If there are people that are slaves, for whatever the reason they might be, okay, that is what it is. And if you decide to abide by the rules and live a different life and follow the laws and everything, then that's what that is. So he's saying, he's not saying I don't even know why Wes is explaining this to Billy. Billy knows exactly what he's reading about. But like Wes said in the beginning, a lot of people, when they talk about certain flash words and phrases, they never talk about the content. So Wes is giving the content why Billy made his statement
From the slave movement in general.
I love that this is respectful. I don't feel this is all just grown-ups talking in a healthy way.
I appreciate this.
And I think this is going to give us, but this is where you and I sitting down in a room, I would be like, great that you came to that, but like, what were the methodologies did you use to conclude that him saying the slave be the master to the slave, you're able to interpret it meaning that he's meaning that? Because I was also raised in the church, and I would question when they're like, oh, in the old days when they said women don't wear jewelry, that's a sin. You would know the exact verse.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, but that was just written because at that time, that was what they did. But then the next week they're telling me, but if you believe in the Bible, you either believe in all of it or none of it. I'm like, well, how come you're just...
Yes.
And they're like, but it's okay for women to do that. Now, those are the things where it's like, we've got to be honest here. Like, if you're respectfully challenging Billy, Billy's going to go and do research and be like, okay, now I want to see how to have, because we're all critical thinkers. those things seem to just get so blindly pushed over when they're like, but that doesn't apply now. And it's like,
Right.
I think there's more common ground than people think, and some of the words to recall, but also like, it's weird to me to think that he would be like, women aren't allowed to wear jewelry and this crap. And then Jesus came and he's like, none of that matters. And then for them to be like,
Yeah.
oh, that only made sense then, but now it doesn't apply. But believe everything. in
Right.
the
So
Bible
this is what's
all
referred
applies.
to.
You know what? Like,
Yeah.
This
So
is
this is what's
this is why, like, I'm always like,
Yeah. So there's a discipline called hermeneutics, and that's the methodology of interpretation. So there are multiple levels that you interpret something. So whether we're dealing with, say, the book of Ephesians, or we're dealing with Tacitus's Annals, we look at something and we contextually read it within the framework of how it's being written. So there's a historical approach where we look at the context. Okay, Paul is writing to a church in Ephesus. What's going on in Ephesus, and how is what he's saying in that city in what is modern day Turkey, how does that pertain to that particular time and framework? Where is Paul coming from? Where is
now, though, is my question, because
yeah. So here's how I answer that question.
I love you to death, Wes, but you're starting to give. Sorry to interrupt you. I believe in God. Like, I believe in and Billy believes in God too. I get why things are challenged and things need to be challenged, but it's saying that was to women then, but being raised in the church.
So it's yes and no.
They say, but then they'll pick something and they're like, but that doesn't apply to them now, because in that context, he was talking to this certain town where they were having problems with I'm like, well, that's not written anywhere. And they're like, well, if you go to blah, blah, blah. And then they say, well, God is all knowing, so he perfectly chose what was in and out of the Bible. I believe whoever created the universe, which is God, in my own opinion, is way smarter than any of us. Why would he leave something like that crap in there, that women shouldn't wear jewelry and all that, and then have in the New Testament, that crap doesn't really matter? Like that's where it's like, I have to believe that it's not I do think there is parts where things got written in, and I don't think they're the major things personally, like whether or not Jesus was crucified, which I think is a major thing, because if he wasn't, that I've studied that a lot, that would challenge that would challenge the core of my whole belief system over whether or not it said if women can wear jewelry or something. But I do think that I don't know if there's an exact answer to this, but I do think, that's perplexing to me, that God of all wisdom would choose to leave some of that in there. It's like, why?
Yeah. So here's the thing. So the Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. There is an original audience, whether that's the ancient Israelite in the ancient Near Eastern culture, or whether it's the Greco-Roman believer in Jesus within the city of Ephesus. So as historians, and I mean, most of the books on this end of my shelf are what are referred to as commentaries.
Sorry, I got
like theologians and historians.
Would God be smart enough to know, I'm not just going to write to this demographic of this civilization now, knowing I'm a God who created the whole world, and people are still going to be studying this thousands of years later?
Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
So I'm sorry.
No. So
by the way,
here's how I would
I'm
answer
the
that,
worst
Mark.
interrupter ever, and it's more of my ADD type thing of like, I get a thought and I got to get it out, or else I freaking forget it. So I'm sorry about interrupting. Thanks for throwing me under the bus for that.
Yeah. So, how I would answer that is I would say this. So you do have examples of where Paul is writing, and he's writing to a particular group. And so we look at, okay, what does it mean for a woman to wear and adorn themselves with gold in a first century Greco-Roman context, right? it has to do with the fact that prostitutes would wear those things. So we need to ask the question, what is the intention of the text? So yes,
I gotta ask
we can
you again,
take the
though.
meaning.
Oh my God, this guy keeps
How do you
asking the
interpret
question,
that?
but
That's
not
what
waiting for
I've
the
been,
answer.
The reason I'm interrupting you is I've heard this. I've been there, done that.
Yeah.
I respect the crap out of you for how deep you go into studying the ancient texts and stuff, which is so
Yeah.
important for the real root of it all. But they've told me that same thing, and I'm like, I don't. But why doesn't it just say that he was speaking to the women and stuff that were prostitutes of that time? Like, where does
No,
that?
he's not speaking to prostitutes. He's talking about purity, and he's talking in the context of when he says, you know, don't adorn yourself with jewelry. The original audience, and we can explore this by the historical
realize how
analysis.
dumb that sounds? Saying the original audience, then later on saying, but now it's okay for this audience because these women and stuff.
No, because it's the
I'm just
point that he's
saying,
making.
I get why people like if we're gonna we got to be open minded if we're punching holes in other stuff to punch holes in our own, and even if it's a
And again, guys, this is the reason why when you hear people talk. So fam, I do apologize for, my phone ran out of battery, but we're gonna come back to the end of that video and then we're gonna go there and just end that completely. But to be honest with you, Billy Carson ended up trying to sue Wes Huff because he lost this debate, and it was pretty terrible that that two people would go out on a debate about Christianity, and then one would lose the debate and then try to sue the other one because he lost the debate. So that was just a very it was very it wasn't very Christian like of Billy Carson to do that. He didn't want the footage to be shown, even though sometimes when you try not to show something, or then that's when it gets shown the most. So I thought that was very pathetic on Billy's behalf. But guys, thank you guys for joining the live. I know I was cut off for a little bit. The battery on my phone died. I do apologize. But guys, if you're just watching, we didn't lose? Oh yeah? How did he not lose? Because everything he said got debunked. So how is it that he didn't lose? I mean, like I said, everybody can form their own opinion. And I'm a sellout because I'm a black brother going against another brother who's misleading people about Christianity. Maybe Billy's a sellout. Instead of actually, doing real research on the things that he goes on national TV, he goes on different podcasts, he goes on different TV shows and speak about things that he really does not do any research about. What do you mean? How did he lose? Did you see the first part of the debate? Everything he was called out on, he didn't even counter oppose anything Wes Huff said. All he did was say, okay, if you say that's true, then it's true. That is called losing. I'm so sorry, man. Like, these questions that you're asking me, it's starting to make you sound like him. Like, watch the debate again. And then you tell me if he didn't lose. You tell me if he backed up his own points. You tell me if he made a great point about whatever he was talking about, and then he backed it up with sources. Not just saying that I traveled to these places and I read this book. You know what I mean? He didn't debunk anything that he went and read. He didn't do any real research. He doesn't know the language of most of the papyrus that he read. On the other hand, Wes is a historian. He has a master's in this thing. He's a linguist. So yes, I mean, hey, listen, it's up for debate, my friend. I appreciate. Listen, I appreciate it, man. If you didn't feel like he lost, tell me why you think he didn't lose. What? How can I make a point if you say my source are forgery? Because it's a known fact they are forgeries. This is just like the debate in the presidential election. You can go look it up. It's common knowledge. You can actually go and look it up. He was reading on ChatGPT. Man, listen, you ain't got to read ChatGPT. Do your own research. Go and look it up. Even when he was talking about, oh, I don't like angels and demons, because they come to earth and they sleep with. Okay, if you acknowledge that they sleep, you don't believe in angel and demon, but yet still you think that they were here sleeping with humans and cutting off heads. So that's inherently saying that you do believe in that they were actually here. Like the way how he talks is so rudimentary. You know what I mean? I don't even know. Absolutely, it's like I don't want to waste my time explaining these things that can be researched on your own. African intelligence. Don't write your name as African intelligence if you don't sound intelligent, if you don't do researches. You sound like someone that can be easily led astray. The Bible said, even if the angels come to earth, question them. And that's what Wes Huff did. He questioned Billy and he folded. I mean, I don't have to look, my friend. I've looked already. I know this. I read the Bible. I do research. So that's why when Wes Huff is going at him, I'm laughing because Wes has done the research. He's talking about the Sinai Bible. He didn't even know what the name of the book was called. He's calling it the Sinai Bible. Wes had to tell him what it was. Wes said, not only that, I have a copy behind me of said Bible you're talking about, that you don't even have one of your own, but you want to talk about you're an expert, the foremost expert on papyrus. And he couldn't even explain what a papyrus was. Wes had to help out the host and say, hey, this is what a papyrus is. Not only that, I've made my own papyrus. This is how they carbon date papyrus. Anyway, man, I shouldn't have to go back and forth with somebody. If your name is African intelligence, my friend, you should be intelligent enough to know that what Billy Carson is talking about is foolishness. He goes on and talks about how Jesus was missing for X amount of years during the Bible and how he was learning from Chinese and Indians instead of thinking that maybe he was teaching the Chinese and Indians, and that's why I mean the Indians and the Chinese and the Greeks, and maybe that's why so many of their history sounds so much like Christianity. Hey, think about that, my friend. Anyway, have a great night, man. I appreciate the back and forth. I have no hate for anybody. I just want you to go and do your own research. And before you come out and try to disprove the Bible, read the source you're trying to disprove first. Read the Bible, then go to your stuff, read your stuff, find the base on which the premise which it's built on, and then try to see which one, how they juxtapose or how they oppose each other. Learn a little bit about stuff that people say, man. Don't just be, that receptive vesicle that just hear everything and say, oh, Wes said this, and Billy said this. Do your own research too. Google's there. You can fact check anything. Whether it's ChatGPT or Google or going to the library or actually doing some legwork and researching some stuff, you can actually do that. Anyway, I appreciate you guys joining. If you haven't live, subscribe and share, try and do so. Have a wonderful night, guys. Appreciate you all. One love.